folks, this is Pastor Mike Hoggard coming to you from the Fortress of Solitude with another Watchman video broadcast. We were talking about the Comic Con and something that, the reason why I had this little doll up here, this idol, playing with it on the last one. Somebody sent me this and they said, Pastor Mike, you got to take a look at this. Now, the striking feature about this particular, this is a comic book character called Magog. There's his name there, and it's from a comic book series called Kingdom Come. I understand that. I get the lingo here. Here's what strikes me about this idea of Magog, in case you don't know this. You don't know where they got this particular name. I don't see the comic book writers going, hey, what can we call this guy? Number one, with horns on his head, ram's horns, like a goat. That kind of tells you something right there. What can we call this guy? Let's call him Magog. Yeah, let's call him that. No, they actually got that name from something that when I saw this, I knew what it represented. I knew what it was. Ezekiel chapter 38, the Bible says, and the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog. Okay, Magog's land. The chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Now, so number one, God, the real God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose son was Jesus Christ, who died on a cross, the real God is against this. He's against this guy. Gog, the land of Magog. That's his name. And it calls him the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Now, some very esteemed Bible scholars would look at that and say, this is an earthly king or a prince of some kind and so on. I would disagree with that. Number one, based upon the language just of the Bible. The Bible talks about Michael in the book of Daniel being, here I'm playing with this thing again, Michael in the book of Daniel being the prince of Daniel's people. In other words, the prince of Israel. He is an angelic ruler, or he has jurisdiction over the Israelites. There is the instance where the book of Daniel again, refers to the prince of the people of Persia, withstood this messenger angel that was coming to Daniel. So this was no earthly prince. This was an angelic host prince, and he was a bad guy. He was one of the evil angels that we were talking about in Psalm 78:49. These evil angels, these devils, these gods that are being referred to are called princes in the Bible. Let me give you Ephesians chapter 6. Verse 12, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. And so this thing here, this comic book character represents a god, an evil angel, a devil. That's who he represents. And this kingdom that these guys are going to bring about is mentioned in Daniel chapter 3 or Daniel chapter 2. It's the fourth kingdom, a kingdom that is made up of principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, spiritual wickedness in high places, mingling themselves with the seed of men. It is iron and clay together. We're going to look at that aspect of it a little bit this week, more so into the next Watchman broadcast. I want to pick it up where we left off last time we met together on this subject of the whole comic book idea. Where do these characters come from? The Bible explains it to you in Genesis chapter 6. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God, it's a reference to the angelic realm, saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Then in verse 4 it says, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children unto them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. So, number one, and not to just completely recover what we talked about and what we've talked about in previous broadcasts. But the Bible's teaching us that there was a time when the gods mated with human women. Evil angels, devils, mated with human women. And what we have found out, and what we're going to explore a little bit in this Watchman broadcast, is that these mighty men which were of old, men of renown, the Bible's telling you that all the stories of mankind bear witness to the truth and the testimony of the Word of God. Let me give you an example of that. One of the earliest records that we have, and those of you who've read Zechariah Sitchin and others, Eric von Daniken, Chariots of the Gods, he's made reference to this idea that gods visited the earth, they seeded mankind, and so on. One of the earliest records that we have of that is what's called the Gilgamesh epic. Now, the Gilgamesh epic is noted in that, number one, it has a flood story. Just like all the stories around the earth, they all have this idea that a god or the gods spared a human and his family and some of the little animals on the earth because he was destroying the earth with a flood. These are the fossilized remains of the true account given to us in the Word of God. So the Gilgamesh epic talks about how the gods flooded the earth with a flood, and there was a few people that were spared in this. The Gilgamesh epic also talks about, it's sort of like one of the first novels, one of the first graphic novels of a superhero type person called Gilgamesh. Here is a graphic of him here. Gilgamesh holding some sort of fierce animal and a lion attacking him, and he is winning the battle. He's sort of a hunter, as it were. Now, the Bible refers to Nimrod as being a mighty hunter before the Lord, and so there is some that believe that Gilgamesh is actually Nimrod. But notice this graphic here of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is holding some sort of weapon in his hand, either that or it's the crank from his old Model A car, and he's holding, that's not a little kitty cat, he's holding a lion next to him. Now, I want you to notice the proportions here, the ratio of Gilgamesh to the lion. Lions, full-grown lions, and this one obviously is full-grown, it has a full mane. Full-grown lions, if they were to actually stand on their back feet, probably in some cases are actually taller than a man. Notice that Gilgamesh is holding this lion, and this lion is relatively small compared to Gilgamesh. Who does that lead me to believe that Gilgamesh was? He was a mighty man of old, a man of renown, a giant, the offspring of the sons of God, evil angels, devils, gods, and the daughters of men. A hybrid. That's who he was. And so we look in the stories and the mythologies going all the way back to Samaria, the land of Shinar is what the Bible calls it. That's where the Tower of Babel was. That's where the kingdom of Babylon and where Nimrod actually was king. So there is a connection here, I believe, between Gilgamesh and King Nimrod in the Bible. And so these are stories that people told of the mighty men, the superheroes, the men who had great strength, the men who were tall, the titans and whatnot. These stories have been around for thousands of years. People told them at campfires, told them to their children. Their children dreamed of these mighty men who had superhero powers and so on. Well, that same idea and the same things are being retold today. We have the stories of mighty men. Men who perform feats of strength. Men who have great powers. Men who are heroes. Women who are heroes. There's even one in a comic book called, you guessed it, Gilgamesh. That's what it's called. Now, there is another story in the Bible that relates to us the accounts of these giants or these extremely large men with superhero powers, the mighty men of old, men of renown. It's in the book of Numbers. If you know anything about the Bible, the Israelites wandering through the wilderness for a year, God was ready to take them into Canaan land, the promised land that he had. But they sent 12 spies ahead to see what was there. When they came back, 10 of the spies said, we can't go in there. The land it's inhabited by giants, by mighty men of old, men of renown. They have built humongous fortresses. They are in leagues with one another. We can't fight these terrible, terrible men. We can't do it. Two of them, Joshua and Caleb, said, oh yeah, God said that we could do this. God said he could beat them for us if we would just go in. The Israelites listened to the 10. God made them die in the wilderness by wandering for 40 years. Here's the account given to us in the book of Numbers of what the spies saw in the land. Numbers 13:22. And they ascended by the south and came into Hebron, where Ahiman, Sheshai, Talmai, and the children of Anak, A-N-A-K, were. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. And in verse 28, nevertheless the people be strong that dwell in the land. Notice they have strength, and the cities are walled and very great. They had strength enough to build humongous walls and very large cities. Moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. Let me stop right here. In the Gilgamesh epic, you have a reference to people called the Anunnaki. I believe that's the same people being referenced here in the book of Numbers, according to the Word of God, the children of Anak. Anak was one of these great big sort of godlike warrior kings who was a titan. He was a god. He was a demigod. He was a hybrid, the cross between the sons of God, these evil angels, and the daughters of men, a mighty man of old, man of renown. And so the Sumerians wrote of the Anunnaki, and here we have Anak. I see a verbal equivalent here. Numbers chapter 13, verse 33, and there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which came of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, so we were in their sight. In Deuteronomy 9, verse 2, a people great and tall, the children of the Anakims, whom thou knowest, and of whom thou hast heard say, who can stand before the children of Anak? Now notice they are called the Anakims. Now, I have a confession to make. Not only did I like to read comic books, science fiction, Lord of the Rings, I was one of those in the 70s that stood in line, actually went to a drive-in theater, back when they still had drive-ins in this county. The Peevely Drive-In, and I watched, along with everybody else, millions of people all over America, in the Star Wars craze. I went to see this. My family decided, okay, we'll take them to see Star Wars. My dad didn't get it. He didn't get it, okay? But I got it. I was so excited to see this movie for the first time, and there's Lord Vader, Darth Vader. And I loved that. I ate it up. And so when George Lucas decided to continue the series, he goes back. Remember, Star Wars 1 started with episode 4. At the time, I couldn't figure that out. So you had episode 4, 5, and 6. But before that, George Lucas decides to go back now and start from the beginning of the story, episode 1. And we're introduced to a young boy that the Jedi Masters realize that there's something unique about this boy. He is like the prophesied one, the promised child. He is the son of his mother, but they really can't figure out who his father is. And his name, it doesn't show up as Darth Vader, but although we figure out that he's Darth Vader, it's not Darth Vader. It's Anakin Skywalker. The name Anakin comes from Anak, a mighty man of old, a man of renown. George Lucas did not just invent this name. He either researched it and studied it, or, as we find out in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 2, the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience, it was inspired to him to name this special child, this miracle child, who eventually turns out to work for the forces of good, the good side of the force. Let me explain the force a little bit. The force is basically elemental witchcraft. Elements, the witches who perform elemental witchcraft say they're using the natural forces of the earth for good to do things. That's what the Jedi are able to tap into. And they say there is a dark side of the force and a good side of the force, but it's the same force. It's witchcraft. So this is who Anakin Skywalker is. He is a warlock. He has these magic powers, a superhero, a supervillain, but he's also the prophesied child that is to be born, and his name happens to be named after the man of the giants, the mighty man of old, the man of renown. And then we have another guy in the Bible, you probably know this one, Goliath of Gath. 1 Samuel 17, verse 4. There went out a champion. Understand that word. I'm going to show it to you in a little bit. Out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. And the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass, and he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. Now, this is very, very interesting, because the Bible is sort of drawing a graphic idea in your mind of just who. It doesn't just say they had a guy named Goliath that was tough. That's not what they said. They described his height, 6 cubits in a span, somewhere around 9 feet, 10 feet tall maybe. I mean, this guy was huge. They described all of the armor that he wore, his spearhead weighing 600 shekels of iron. In other words, it was heavy. But he was so massive and so strong that he was, and probably he was the only one able to pick it up. It kind of reminds me of a story. I mentioned the Fortress of Solitude, if you don't know what that is. That is Superman's lair. That's his address. It's up in the north. It's very interesting. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, I know a little bit about Superman. Superman has a locked door into the Fortress of Solitude that even if someone found out where it was, because it's a secret place, nobody would be able to get in it. Superman made a key, and this thing is huge. And there isn't a man or a tractor or a piece of equipment on earth that can pick up this key. It is so heavy. So only Superman can unlock the secret place in the north. Boy, do I want to deal with that. All right. And so anyway, no one was able to pick up Goliath's spear. So Goliath is mentioned as, number one, a giant. We find out from other scriptures that he was the child of that giant, probably Anak. So he was of the Anakim, the sons of God, the daughters of men, the mighty men of old, men of renown. The Bible mentions the word champion. Now, this is pretty much the only place in the Bible where it talks about someone being a champion. It doesn't say that it's God's people. It doesn't say that about the Apostle Paul and all the Christian disciples. It doesn't say that about them at all. This is the only place in the Bible where it mentions someone being a champion. And he's not a good guy. He hates God. He hates God's people. He blasphemes God. He curses God. Goliath is a picture of the Antichrist. He's got 6s all over him. 6 cubits tall, 600 shekels of iron. Him and his brothers have 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot. So he's a picture of the Antichrist. David, of course, being a picture of Jesus Christ himself. So it's no wonder. Here we have Marvel Comics Group. They took the name and the character Goliath, made a superhero out of him. And I just like looking at these. You think you're such a big man, Goliath. Here's where Vulcan cuts you down to size. Now, this is also interesting, too. So here we have this character named Vulcan. Do you know that etymologically, Vulcan, because Vulcan is the mythological god who forges iron and steel and stuff like that, more than likely named after Tubal-Cain. Tubal-Cain and Vulcan, they're related, who is of the offspring of Cain, whom God put a mark on. Very, very interesting, the names they come up with. We also have another from Arcana Comics. Arcana means a secret doctrine, a mystery is what it references. A superhero by the name of Champion. Now remember, Champion and Goliath, they all go together. They are the sons of Anak. They are the enemies of God. They are the product of evil angels, something that God told these angels, you cannot marry. See those women down there? You can't have them. So they said, oh, okay. So they went down and they had them. They did exactly what God ordained them not to do. The Bible says they left their first estate in heaven and they came down and did that. We've actually seen movies where that was the case. And I'll show you that in a little bit pertaining to superheroes. So why is it, and this always struck me as interesting. Here's Smiling Joel Osteen. who preaches the wrong gospel. It's not the gospel according to the Scriptures. And there's something about, and when I first heard this, I'm just going, well, it just doesn't sound right. Discover the champion in you. That's his theme song, Lakewood Church. Okay? And Joel Osteen's teaching you, discover what's inside of you, living like a champion. Discover the champion inside of you. Joel Osteen says that you've got one inside of you. You've got one of these champions. You've got something inside of you that needs to be brought out. It's bound. It needs to be released. We'll show you. Well, I've already talked about this I don't know how many times in videos, but we'll show you exactly what he's referring to here as we move on. Let's look at some of these other heroes of myth. We've dealt with not so much myth. We've dealt with Goliath. I believe the Bible's true. The sons of Anak, the Zamzumans, the Bible calls them, the Anakims, and other names that the Bible gives them, mighty men of old, men of renown, who are the cross between the gods, evil angels, devils, and human women. We have almost that exact story in the god or the superhero. One of the first superheroes called Hercules. Now, when I was growing up, there was a cartoon. It used to come on, I can't remember what day, I think probably Sunday morning, that dealt with Hercules. This is before I started going to church as a young boy. And I used to love to get up Sunday morning and watch Hercules, that story, that cartoon, because he was strong and mighty and could do great things. In fact, the whole myth or the story of Hercules is that he performed what was called 12 labors, 12 what seemed to everybody else to be impossible tasks. Super strength. And Hercules was the offspring of a god and a human woman. So here is the Bible telling you that these are mighty men. They have strength, they have might, they have superpowers. They are men of old, men of renown. In other words, there was going to be stories told about these men, these giants, these titans. One of those stories is Hercules. And so the Bible's telling you, if you hear a story about it, here's the truth. Here's what really happened. So we go all the way back to Samaria. We go all the way through ancient Babylon. Even in Israel, they told stories. They could tell stories of the mighty Samson. In Greek mythology, they were talking about these semi-gods, these titans who could perform these great feats. So now in modern times, we have movies, we have TV shows, Hercules, we have comic books. Here is the incredible Hercules. Look at the muscles on this guy. Massive muscles. Now, we all know, when we look at this, we see these muscles and we go, Charles Atlas never looked like that. But did you know that we have the capability now through genetic manipulation to actually build, and they're grotesque right now, we ain't got it down right, humans with very, very large, grotesque-looking muscles. They're working on it right now. Don't you know that there has been, over the last, probably, let's say thousands of years, the idea of a super soldier, a warrior who was so great and so powerful that no enemies could stand against him. The Philistines, they thought they had a shoe-in with Goliath. They had on their hands a real-life super soldier. We know that Hitler was working on it. Doesn't stand to reason that the greatest superpower on the earth, the United States of America, probably Russia and China, are all looking for ways of having a soldier on the battlefield that cannot easily be destroyed. So this is not just mythology. This is true. One of the labors of Hercules was that he was to take over holding the earth up for Atlas. And there was a little trickery involved, and I won't get into the whole story. But remember Atlas. Remember Atlas was a half human, half god. Hercules, half human, half god. Incredible strength. They are holding the entire earth upon their shoulders. Atlas did it. Hercules did it for a while. Here's what that reminds me of, and I want you to follow me on this one, because I see everything as being sourced from the Word of God. We know and we're understanding that these The sons of Satan are a prefiguring of another Jesus, the Antichrist. Here is the responsibility of the real Christ. A prophecy, Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, "For unto us a child is born." Remember, Anakin was the prophesied child. "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders." And we know, according to Scripture, that for 1,000 years, Christ is going to come, and he is literally going to reign for 1,000 years, and the government of the entire world is going to rest upon his shoulders. He's going to bear the burden of governing the entire earth for 1,000 years. The government literally will be upon his shoulder. So here we have in the mythology of old a sort of corrupted version of that. Only this is not Christ. This would be a prefiguring of a God, half human, who shoulders the entire earth upon his shoulder. The weight, the burden of the whole world is resting upon him. The reason why this stands out so much in my mind is that I remembered watching Superman Returns, which was a continuation of the Superman story started by Alexander Salkind in the mid-70s, the Superman the movie. So here we have this scene, and you look at it here. There's a scene from the comics. Here's a scene from Superman Returns. And he's holding the planet, the Daily Planet, on his shoulders. This scene is pulled right out of mythology. Here, whoever wrote the story, devised the script, was the producer, director, whatever, had this idea of Superman holding the world on his entire shoulders, the government being upon his shoulders. So it is a picture of a Christ, but not the real Christ, an anti-Christ, another Jesus. The whole Superman idea is that he is a replacement Savior for the real Jesus. Now let's look at some of these others. Some of these mighty men of old, men of renown, these mythologies. We have Horus. Horus is the hawk god. And I want you to consider this as you look at the idea of symbols. I believe the Bible explains what all these symbols are all about. In Mark chapter 4, Jesus taught a parable. And he used symbolic language in teaching this parable. He talked about a sower went out to sow seed, and some fell by the wayside, and the fowls of the air came and devoured it up. He then explains in Mark chapter 4, he also does it in 2 of the other Gospels, exactly what is meant by fowls of the air, because he actually says, these are the seed is the Word of God. So it's someone going out, handing out tracts or preaching, preaching to people or witnessing to people or whatever. And the wayside are people who don't care, and they have their life totally enveloped in sin. And he says the devil comes down and gobbles up or eats up the word as soon as it's thrown out there. So he's telling you that fowls or flying winged birds are a picture of angels, evil angels, devils. So here we have Horus. I want you to look at him. He is half angel, half human. Where did this come from? It came from the idea that he is the son of Osiris and Isis. Osiris was the sun god. The sun mated with the earth, and we have the sons of God. And the Bible refers to angels as the heavenly luminaries. So we have the sun god, a heavenly luminary, an angel, mating with a human woman to produce Horus, who is pictured as half angel, half human being. And there's all these stories and mythologies about Horus and what he does and what he represents. We're going to look at some of those. But I want you to grasp this idea of the sun god. Now Horus now becomes sort of the reincarnation of Osiris, who is dead, and we'll look at him in a little bit. But Osiris and Horus both represent the sun deity or the solar deity. The Mayans had a sun god. The Mexicans had a sun god. The Indians had a sun god. The Romans, the Greeks, the Babylonians, the Chinese, the Japanese flag is basically in reference to the sun god. The Chinese emperor was the son of the sun god. He's supposed to be a representation of half God, half human. So we have these stories all over the earth, and all these kings reigning over mankind. The emperor of Japan is the sun god. Even in India, you see this here, the sun god, who has these horses and chariots and superpowers and all of this stuff, and all these, the Bhagavad Gita, which I have a copy of. I've never read it, but from what I understand, it talks about the exploits of these gods and of these devils and so on. So in itself is sort of like a comic book of old. It's telling the story of the men of old, men of renown. Now, here's something very, very interesting. This goes into the whole Superman mythos, this idea of a son of the gods. Jor-El, here's a graphic of him here. In the early renditions of the Superman comic books, Jor-El was always pictured with this emblem upon his chest. It's an emblem of the red sun of Krypton. Jor-El, now should follow me here. Jor-El represents a god, a sun god. That's who he represents. So his son would be an offspring of the sun god, just like Horus was. All right, so keep going with me on this one. The Bible actually describes the religion of the solar deity. Here the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Greeks, the Romans, the Indians, they all had this same idea of the sun god, is that the sun god rose from the depths. He ascends and he's carried on a chariot through the sky, and he reigns over all the world. And then he is smitten somehow, and he is cast down, and he dies. And so that's the sun going down over the west. He falls into the ocean, because beyond the landmass that people could see, they knew there was an ocean over there. So he falls into the ocean, and he goes through the lower parts of the earth into hell, into Hades, the pit, or whatever they called it. And then he is resurrected again the next morning. Let me show you what that looks like in the Scriptures. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer? He was an angel of light. You know the word Lucifer means bearer of light? That's what Satan is. He is an angel, a bearer, a messenger of light. The King James Bible got it right. That's what his name is, messenger of light, Lucifer. Son of the morning, how art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. Now watch this. Okay? Number one, here's what Lucifer does. I will ascend into heaven. That's 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. in the midsummer. 6 o'clock in the morning, the sun comes up and says, I will ascend into heaven. Number two, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. So what Lucifer is saying is, I'm going to be more brighter, and my glory is going to outshine the stars. So 4 o'clock in the morning, all you see is stars. 6 o'clock in the morning, as the sun comes up, those stars go away. He is exalting his throne above the stars in heaven. Now you can't see the stars anymore. Then he says, I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. Did you know that every day the sun rises in the east and sets in the west? Every day. But every year, the sun, because of the turning of the earth and the rotation around the sun, whatever, the sun goes from the south and it rises up to the north at the, let's see, which one is it? The the summer solstice. He's rising to the north, and then at the winter solstice, he's set back down again in the south. I will ascend also above. Also, not only am I going to rise this way, I'm going to rise this way, into the north, into the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. So we say at noon every day, between 6 a.m., 6 p.m., at midday, the sun is at its highest point. He is exalting himself like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down, because after he's exalted up here, what happens? Thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. So, Jor-El ends up being Lucifer, and the superhero based upon him is the son of Satan. Jor-El gives birth to Kal-El. There's more to that I'm going to show you here in a little bit. The guys who invented these characters, they knew something, or they were inspired to do this, and I think both is true. Oddly enough, we have a superhero by the name of Osiris. Ammon, yes, Adrian, and more. The wisdom of Zehuti, the courage of Mehen. I am truly your brother, Isis. I am Osiris, even though I am not sure what that means. See, we have a superhero by the name of Osiris. Now, his human name, and we saw it here, Ammon Tomaz. Where did that come from? Ammon means, is the Egyptian god. I think it's Ra, the sun god. But Tomaz, where did that come from? It came from the story of the dying god Tammuz. Tammuz is Bacchus or Adonis or Apollo, or even the sun god, who is smitten and he is dying. He dies and he awaits resurrection. They worshipped Ammon Tomaz or Tammuz. They worshipped him in the book of Ezekiel, and God said it was an abomination. Ezekiel 8:13, he said also unto me, turn thee yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations that they do. Then he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. They're weeping for the dying God who is awaiting resurrection. That's who Osiris, Horus is. That's who the Antichrist is. He has a head wound. He's in the pit. He is awaiting his resurrection. These comic book characters are nothing more than prefigurings and telling the story of the coming of the Antichrist. One of the notable features about Horus is what's called the eye of Horus, the all-seeing eye. You see, Horus, for some reason, has got an eyeball missing. And he's had his eye out, and now he has with this one eye, he can see greater than any of the other gods or any of the people. It's called illumination. People want to have the eye of Horus opened up in them so they can see into the spiritual realm and so on. Here's where that came from. Zechariah chapter 11 verse 17, woe to the idol, notice I-D-O-L, shepherd that leaveth the flock. The sword shall be upon his arm, and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened. His right eye darkened, taken out. So when you hear stories of Cyclops, it's a representation of those gods who have had one eye darkened, and yet the other eye is an eye of illumination. It is what people are seeking after. Notice in this graphic up here that it's the all-seeing eye of Horus that is undertaking or favoring the undertaking of a new world order. It sits atop the pyramid. In other words, this is the Antichrist. And all of these comic books are drawing people to the idea of the coming superhero God who's going to save mankind. They have comic book conventions all over the country. Now, when I was growing up, comic books were for kids. And you bought old comic books at yard sales. You bought new comic books if you had the money at Walmart or wherever it is your mom took you shopping. I didn't know any kids that actually had a subscription to these things. They just, when they got money, they got comic books, and we treated them like dirt, all right? We put them in, I had a big metal box I stored all mine in. Didn't take very good care of them. But now, I mean, these things are like huge. It's not just geeks anymore that read comic books. They have comic book conventions called the Comic Con. Isn't that amazing? That's a catchy name, isn't it? The Comic Con. Here's their logo. It's Horus's eye of illumination. It's the same one that's on here. It's everywhere. It's the eye of illumination. They're trying to illuminate people and teach them these stories so that when they see the reality, or He is going to be the desire. Just like Jesus was the desire of the nations, this Antichrist is going to be the lustful desire of the people of mankind. They want to be like Superman, Hawkman, so on. Going back to Osiris, remember that Horus is the son of Osiris, the sun god, and he is the son of a human woman. There is a Masonic symbol, a Masonic device called the Pythagorean triangle. It was named after Pythagoras, P-Y-T-H. He gets his name from the python. Pythagoras was this learned sage who had the illumination of the serpent in him. That's why they called him Pythagoras. He is the one that devised the idea of how to find the third angle of any kind of a triangle. And there's a formula. It's called a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So if you know the length of line A and the length of line B, and you square those two, you'll get the sum of that, which is c squared. You don't have to know a lot of math. Just follow me here. So here's how you'll see in a lot of old Masonic books and Masonic emblems, you'll see the Pythagorean triangle, and it always has the triangle and the squares around it. Here's what it represents. You have a squared, which represents Osiris, the god, the male. B squared, remember, they're added together. A squared plus B squared. B squared is Isis. And when those two are added together and squared, you get the sum of that. Horus. The illuminated, notice his Illuminati eyeball here. Notice that he is related to the Ankh, which is the cross, like an X, with a female oval on top of it. It's the male and the female together, the sons of God and the daughters of men together. That's what he represents. And amazingly, we see this in these comic book characters. They are the offspring of something. Jor-El giving birth to Kal-El and so on. And this all takes us back to the giants in the earth in those days. And also after that, the sons of God came into the daughters of men. They bear children to them. The offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. That's what Horus represents. Now remember, Horus was the hawk god. So we have Hawkman, DC Comics. He is modeled. They didn't just say, I wonder if we could have like Kangaroo Man. No, that won't work. Let's try Hawkman. Yeah. No, he was modeled, inspired by spirits, modeled after the son of God, daughters of man, their offspring, Horus. Hawkman is a prefiguring, a telling of the story of the superhero that's going to come, the Antichrist. And there's some dispute about this. One of the books that I've used for my sources is Our Gods Wear Spandex. I got some information from that. He theorizes that the word hero itself comes from the Greek rendition of the word Horus. Could very well be true. So we've dealt with Osiris, we've dealt with Horus. What about Isis? I used to get up way early in the morning, Saturday morning. See, kids, I'm old school. Not so old school like my grandparents' old school. But I grew up in the age of television. I grew up in the age of turning the knob by hand. Okay? I was the remote control in our house. Mike, turn it on channel 5. Okay, Dad, I turned the channel on. Now we got it easy. I say, son, hand me the remote. I turned my own channel. I used to get up 5:30, 6 o'clock on Saturday morning because Saturday was the only day that cartoons came on. And that was in the day when we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 7 channels on TV. Okay? And I'd get up early Saturday morning and watch the Farm Report just so I wouldn't miss the first cartoons and kid shows that came on about 7 o'clock Central Time Saturday morning on ABC, CBS, NBC. I'd never missed one, and I had my favorites. And one of them was, there was a block of programming. It was called the Shazam Isis Hour. And we'll talk about Shazam. But Isis was one of these characters that they invented for Saturday morning. It wasn't a cartoon. It was a live action show. And it was called The Secrets of Isis. Now, it started out, here again, we have a super heroine, a goddess. We have a woman who is a normal human being who, upon a discovery of finding this sacred, she's an archaeologist, and she finds this secret amulet. And she discovers that when she puts this amulet on and says the words, "Oh, mighty Isis, 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 Isis," she is transformed into this goddess. She can fly, she can read people's minds, she can do stuff. She's this superhero lady. Now, here's the thing. Now, Isis is the goddess. And I'll tell you a little bit more about her as we go on. But she becomes a god. She becomes a human with god-like powers. And my sister, she actually liked watching this one because it was a girl. And we're going, oh, we wish we could. We used to play like I was Shazam and she was Isis. We had this in our minds that we wanted to be these characters. We wanted these powers. Didn't even dawn on me how dangerous this was and how against Bible Christianity this is. Now, the amulet that she found, I want you to notice here, the secrets of Isis. She wears this on her forehead. It is a bull's horns with the sun disk inside of it. Literally, her third eye. This is the goal of Freemasonry, of Mormonism, of the New Age movement, inside of the church, quantum spirituality, Leonard Sweet, Rick Warren, all these things. It's the goal of all of these groups is that man becomes a god by having his eye of Horus awakened inside of him. You see, it's already there. It just needs to be awakened. That's what Joel Osteen was teaching you. You've got this champion inside of you, this Horus, this god inside of you. He's asleep. He's bound. He needs to be awakened. And so when she dons this amulet, she now has her pineal gland opened up. She now has the sun disk, God giving her illumination, Horus giving her illumination. It's called the Bindi in Eastern mysticism. You see these women who are adorned with this sun disk, this spot. Think about that. Study that out in the Bible. I'll show you that some future teaching. She has a spot on her forehead, a mark on her forehead. What this is, what Isis, the secrets of Isis, what she was teaching. Revelation chapter 13, verse 16, He causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Now I want you to follow with me here, because remember, we found out that that Horus had his right eye put out, and he had his right arm cut off. So the eye of illumination, the mark of the beast in the forehead, means that you have your mind darkened. You cannot see the grace of God. And so now you cannot see the real Jesus, so now you're turned to a fake one. You have the mark on your right hand. Now your right hand has no power. Right hand is the arm of strength. Right hand is where God's book is. It is where the Son of God is. So now you cannot be saved because you have the mark exactly where the beast, the idol shepherd, had his stuff either cut off or cut out. Isn't that amazing? Those who take this mark are having the grace of God through the New Testament cut off of them, and they're having the illumination. They cannot see who the real Jesus is, so now they follow the fake one. The mark on the forehead. That's the secret that Isis is teaching. I wanted to follow that. Me and my sister wanted to follow that. Here's another super heroine. Wonder Woman. Notice that she has a mark on her forehead too. It's a star, a pentagram. Thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne, I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will be like the Most High. That's what that pentagram represents. Wonder Woman. And she has a story all of her own. Now, Wonder Woman was more than just a comic book, as is what's going on in this world. They're turning all of these comics into movies, TV shows, cartoons, whatever. People are getting... So if you don't read comic books, I guarantee you, you're seeing these movies. And Wonder Woman was one of those movies that came out in the 70s. My dad, he liked to watch Bugs Bunny with me, but he never was really interested in ISIS. But for some reason, Dad never missed an episode of Wonder Woman. Linda Carter. Never could figure out why back then. But he never missed an episode of Wonder Woman. Okay? So here's Wonder Woman, and she has a story too. Her name is Diana. Her Earth name, her human name, is Diana Prince. Remember who Magog was. Remember the prince of the people of Persia. Remember principalities. Because her real name as a goddess, as an Amazon woman, these warrior, godlike women who have these powers and they hate men like Jezebel. Her name was Princess Diana. I'm going to show you that in a little bit. She is described as being as beautiful as Aphrodite, that's the goddess of sex. Wise as Athena, she's the owls mentioned in the book of Isaiah. Stronger than Hercules, he's a son of the gods. Swifter than Mercury, we're going to look at Mercury here in a little. Mercury is like Adonis and Bacchus and Dionysus and all these dying gods, Tammuz, that's who he is. Come from a race of warrior women called the Amazons, endowed with the powers of the gods. These Amazons were warrior queens. Here's an image of them. And basically these Amazons were stories of old that people told of this mythological island where all these women, these fierce, godlike powered women that hated men, lived. And so that's the story of Wonder Woman. We have sort of a crossbreed of that. You remember Xena, warrior princess, endowed with these superpowers, this super heroine woman given powers of the gods. I want you to notice that if you look back at Linda Carter's outfit, you don't really pay much attention to the eagle that's on her. But if you look at the graphic cartoon or the comic book version of Wonder Woman, you see that she bears the power of an eagle. Now, remember what I told you, that in symbolism, a bird, like the double eagle on the front of the Masonic book, represents a spirit, an angel. They have wings, a god or a goddess, as it were, an evil angel. So Wonder Woman derives, and this is basically from the storyline of Wonder Woman, she derives her powers from the eagle god, the flying god. Now I want to show you this from the Bible. You know that ancient Rome used this same symbol as a symbol of their conquesting powers. Adolf Hitler, the same thing, the Nazi eagle that was out to take over all the other nations of the world. The Bible tells you what it is, so you don't have to guess. By the way, there's another nation uses that same symbol. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 49. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth. A nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand, a nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. So God is described, he says, number one, a nation whose tongue you should not understand, a nation of fierce countenance. Now, I've talked a lot about this before, but Daniel describes the king of fierce countenance. He is of this nation, described as the eagle nation. Remember, eagles were an abomination. You could not eat an eagle. I think the rule of thumb in what you could eat as far as birds is concerned was if it ate seeds, you could eat it, like a dove and chicken. You could not eat an eagle or a vulture because they consumed flesh. They represented fleshly appetites and so on. So basically the eagle represents this evil nation that's coming. This is why Rome used it as a sign of conquest. Hitler used it as a sign of conquest. Wonder Woman, she comes with the power of this nation and king of fierce countenance. She literally has the spirit of the gods giving her her power. Now, her name, Princess Diana. That name comes right from the scripture. We note in Acts chapter 19, verse 27, They're talking so that not only this our craft is in danger to be set at naught, but also that the temple of the great goddess Diana should be despised, and her magnificence should be destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worshipeth. Great is Diana of the Ephesians. So here we have a comic book character. Isis, Wonder Woman, Xena, warrior princess, all modeled after this one female goddess. She is called in the book of Acts Diana. Great is Diana of the Ephesians. But they also mention that Asia and the whole world worships her. The Greeks called her Diana. The Romans called her Venus. Aphrodite, the god of Eros, or lovemaking. She is the fertility goddess. Did you know that Diana and Isis, the same thing? Isis, Ishtar, Ashtaroth from the Old Testament, whom God said you're not to worship, not have anything to do with it. So Wonder Woman and Isis, God said you're not supposed to have anything to do with them. You're not supposed to follow them. The enemies of God. Other names all throughout history. The Mayans worshiped the fertility goddess. The Aztecs, the Peruvians, the ancient Indians, Native Americans worshiped. The Indians from India worshiped her. I think she was Shakti. Many other names given to her, but it's the same goddess. Her real name in the Bible is Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Now, something, if you read the scriptures, you understand and know that the earth is always characterized as a woman. The earth opened her mouth to drink Abel's blood and so on, and you'll see that. The earth has a womb, like waters issued forth from a womb. When the fountains of the great deep broken up in the days of the flood, God described that as like waters coming out of a womb. So the earth is always pictured as a woman. Hence, mythology always attributes the earth as a goddess of fertility. In other words, the power of the woman to produce or generate life gives her this godlike character. So the earth itself is pictured as Gaia, the goddess of fertility, the goddess of green. So I want you to think about this. The sun god shining down on the productive earth, and it produces fruit. Where does fruit come? Hangs on trees. Where do the trees come from? The leaves, the green leaves on the trees bring in the power source from the sun. So it's like the sun joining with the earth to create these fruits. Think about that idea. So we have the sun god mating with Isis, Osiris and Isis coming together to produce Horus. He's like the fruit that's on the tree of knowledge of good and evil that we're not supposed to partake of, not supposed to have anything to do with. Ted Turner, Turner Broadcasting, a New Ager, okay, worships the earth. So he invents this cartoon character, this comic book superhero called Captain Planet. And he's green, and he says, the power is yours. And you find these teenagers, these children, who represent earth, air, fire, water, and then heart or spirit or ether. And they have these powers inside of them. And they decide to use them for good because Gaia, the mother goddess, is going, oh, the bulldozers are pushing down the trees and they're harming me. It's hurting me. Oh, we need someone to save the planet. So she teaches the children that if they join forces, they can create a force. Think about it. Elemental witchcraft. They can create a force that will bring forth, coming up out of the pit, Captain Planet. Spirit of the earth, Gaia, bringing forth Captain Planet, the green man. You see, and we don't see it much in America, although we do, we just don't recognize it. Captain Planet is a derivative of the green man, or in England he's referred to as Jack on the Green. The English people, they love the word Jack. There's Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack on the Green, One-Eyed Jack. Anyway, Jack on the Green man. You'll see him always characterized in sculptures or in paintings or ornamentation as a green face of leaves and twigs and sticks and branches and things like that. Talking trees, as it were. We have that same idea here in America. He's called the Jolly Green Giant. He is the God of the earth. He is the son of the productive earth who has mated with the sun. That's who the Jolly Green Giant is. We have a superhero character named after Jack on the Green, or the Green Man, who is a picture of the Antichrist, the Green Arrow. Who else? Robin Hood. Notice that the Green Arrow sort of looks like Robin of the Hood. Robin of the Hood, always dressed in green. He was a picture of this superhero who beat down the evil, bad people and was a helper of the good people. See, these stories have been told for centuries. Back in the old days of England, he was Robin of the Hood. Now he's the Green Arrow. Now he's the Hulk, another green man. What does the Bible have to say about these guys? I'm just showing you that the Bible is telling you who these characters really are. Deuteronomy 12:2, you shall utterly destroy all the places wherein the nations which ye shall possess served their gods. Remember what gods are, evil angels. Upon the high mountains and upon the hills, under every green tree, a sacred place, one of the most sacred places in order to worship this god Baal, or this dying god Tammuz, was always under trees like evergreens or things like that. When did people start putting evergreen trees in their houses? Think about it, all right? I'm not condemning anybody for having a Christmas tree. I don't do that. But this idea, let's talk about the Druids for a minute. The Druids always worshipped oak trees, and there's a reason why. Some worshipped pine trees, and so the pine cone was a sacred symbol of the offspring, or what came out of the pine tree. This is why the gland, the eye of Horus inside of your brain, is called the pineal gland, the pineal gland, because it actually looks like a little pine cone. The pine cone represents what came out of the tree, the fruit that the tree produced. Are you following me here? Because the idea is that Osiris was killed by this evil Nephthys, and Isis took his body and hid it inside of a wooden casket or a tree, the trunk of a tree. That's where she hid him at. And so he awaits resurrection out of the tree. So this is why in the Old Testament days, when they went to worship Baal or Tammuz, the dying god, they did so worshiping under a green tree. God said in Psalm 37:35, I have seen the wicked in great power. Notice, the wicked, spreading himself like a green bay tree. You know what that is? The emperors of Rome were adorned with a green bay laurel, like a crown. The Olympians, stop right here. The Olympians, the gods who dwelt on Mount Olympus, and their offspring, those who could do the heroic feats. So they had the Olympic Games, where the mighty men would perform feats of great strength. They would wrestle in the gymnos. Gymnos is where we get the word gymnastics and gymnasium. Gymnos is a Greek word for naked. You know why? Because when guys grappled back then, they didn't wear any clothes. They wrestled naked. And the reason why was so that your opponent could not use your clothes against you. Pagans did that, not Christians. But anyway, look here. They decided a few years ago at the Olympic Games to adorn everybody's head with these green bay laurel crowns. A crown, a king. Think of that. That's what that's a picture of, the green man. The green bay laurel. Then we get into the god Mercury. I talked about him a little while ago. That's who Wonder Woman has part of the power. She has the swiftness of Mercury. Mercury is a messenger god. He's a guide of the souls to the underworld, which is hell. In other words, he's taking everybody to hell. Sort of what it means. He's similar to Hermes. He is, watch this now, this is very important. He is the bridge between the God world and the earth. He's like the messenger between it. He joins them together, and I'll show you what that means in a little bit. He is a messenger, hence he is an angel. That's what the word angel means, a messenger or a message bearer. He's a keeper of the mysteries, the mystery doctrines. Let's see here. Morals and Dogma is called an esoteric book. And those who take Freemasonry seriously don't let anybody in on their secrets. They don't like to, see, they're calling themselves now, we're not a secret society. We're a society with secrets. Have you ever heard of something being hermetically sealed? That means it's based upon the god Hermes or Mercury, in that he was a keeper of the secrets, keeper of the secret doctrine. We can't tell anybody what this is about. He's the author of a book called the Emerald Tablet. The Emerald Tablet was this idea of, I'll explain it like this. The civilization before the earth in Atlantis had all this advanced knowledge of immortality and stuff like that, knowing that the world was going to be destroyed with a flood, wrote these secret mystery doctrines down on 2 pillars. That's the same pillars of Jacob and Boaz that are in the temple. And wrote these secret mysteries down on these 2 pillars so they could survive the flood. Hermes then found the pillars and wrote it down in what's called the Emerald Tablet. What's written on the Emerald Tablet is the key to man's immortality. In other words, how man becomes a god. It is sort of like the anti-Bible, the lost word. Now, the real word of God is Jesus Christ and His Bible, His Word. So the lost word of Masonry, and the Emerald Tablet, and the keys to man's immortality and all this stuff, it's the Antichrist. That's what Mercury is a messenger of. So notice that Mercury, he's got a rod in his hand with these little serpents on it. Notice that he has wings on his head. That just kind of looks weird. So he is an angel with wings. He's a god. And he has a rod in his hand with DNA on it and wings. Here's another rendition of that. It's called the caduceus. Notice the 2 serpents. They represent man's DNA. And coming out of man's DNA is a rod with wings. Now remember, one of the names for Jesus in the Old Testament was the rod. Do you remember how when Moses cast his rod to the ground that it became a serpent? That rod was a picture of Christ. Pharaoh's magicians did the exact same thing. The rod. Their rods became serpents. That rod is with wings is a picture of an evil angel, the beast, the Antichrist. I was looking for graphics like this one. I came across this one and I went, you remember House? Now, let me go into this just for a minute. Back in the old days, when I was growing up, you had guys like Mannix and Cannon. You remember Cannon, big fat guy, had a car phone. That was so cool. Mannix just duked it out with people and stole their gun, okay? But now we have these superhero sleuth detectives like The Mentalist. I watched The Mentalist. The Mentalist who has this ability to read people and tell whether or not they're telling the truth, and he's deductive reasoning. We even have Ichabod Crane coming back from the dead. We have Sherlock Holmes. There's a detective story about a woman who never forgets anything. She remembers everything that she sees and hears. She has this heightened power that gives her an ability. Remember House. He is this super sleuth doctor detective that if there's some bizarre disease out there, House always has the way of figuring it out and healing the disease. That's why he's rendered this way. Because the whole idea of the Antichrist, the great work, the secret doctrine, is that he is going to be a cure for all of man's diseases. Hence, bringing mankind to immortality. That's exactly what the devil promised in the Garden of Eden. man's immortality. You shall never die. You shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. So we have the comic book character of the Flash, who was modeled exactly after Mercury. The wings, the speed that he has, the lightning bolt on his chest. Jesus said, I saw Satan fall from heaven as a bolt of lightning. We have the god Thor. Thor, whose hammer gives him his power, and he's able to conquer all of his enemies with his superhero powers. He is a god. He is a son of the gods. In the rendering that Marvel made of him, he is the son of Odin. Odin is what we get Wednesday. You ever wonder why Wednesday was spelled the way it was? It's the god Odin. And so Thor is the son of the gods, Odin, and he has his superhero hammer that only he has the ability to pick up and use. Only he can wield the sacred hammer. It's sort of like the key into the Fortress of Solitude, or Goliath's spearhead. Only Goliath can pick that thing up. Do you remember watching the movie The Avengers? Of course you watched it. Everybody did. You went to see The Avengers, and you remember the scene where Thor was fighting with the Hulk. And the Hulk was getting the best of him, and so Thor decided to throw his hammer, and the Hulk went after it. And the Hulk, who can do anything, cannot pick up the hammer. Did you remember that scene? That's why. Because the idea is that only Thor has the right to use the hammer. He has all power. Not even Hulk can pick it up. And so Thor just goes like that, and the hammer comes to him. Like the Jedi who do that with their lightsaber. Okay? Thor's hammer. I noted that in the movie Thor, his hammer had this character on it. Let's see here. It's called a triquetra. And it represents, it's sort of related to what we saw a while ago, the caduceus, where you have two strands of DNA and then one rising out of it. It's basically a symbol for immortality or rebirth. There it is on the New King James Version of the Bible. Here it is. You've seen me use this before. The Aquarian conspiracy, same symbol. What it represents is that mankind is going to be a god by means of what this symbol represents. The champion's going to rise up out of us and turn us all into immortals. It's going to heal all of our diseases. Do you believe that? That's what they teach. That's what the devil promised Eve in the Garden of Eden. Now, here's the thing. Thor is one of these gods who dies, is buried on the earth, and then he's resurrected to save the world. Actually, he has more power after his resurrection than he does before he's died and buried. Now I want you to remember that, and remember that theme, because we're going to see it again. Here's what Manly Hall went through all of the earth's myths, their ideas. He studied the mighty men of old, men of renown. He came to the conclusion that just about every civilization on the earth and all of their stories and myths and legends were all basically teaching one secret doctrine. It was given different names because at the Tower of Babel, God scattered everybody and thence scattered their ideas of who this secret was all about. So he's given the name of Thor here, Apollo here, Dionysus here, Odin somewhere else, or whatever. He's given these different names. Isis and Diana and Ashtaroth is the name of the goddess. But it's the same concept and the same idea. And it has to do with man's ability to become a god. That's what the secret doctrine is. So Manly Hall writes about Thor. He swings his mighty hammer in the fields of space, sets the primordial atoms in motion, and establishes order out of chaos. Have you ever seen that? First thing I think of when I see that, you remember the TV show Get Smart. Okay? It was a comedy based upon what was popular back during the Cold War days of the 60s, was the Americans against the Russians and the spy agencies. And so Maxwell Smart, who ascended out of the ground in the underground bunker, sort of like here. He is smart, and of course he's got like the first cell phone in his shoe. We thought, man, that's amazing. Okay. Anyway, he works for the order called Control. The bad guys work for Chaos. You see the ideas here? He establishes order out of chaos, or control out of chaos. Here in Morals and Dogma, you have it here. You see the emblem here, Ordo ab Chaos. See the eagle with two heads? He's the fusion of opposites. See the crown? See the illumination above it? Ordo ab Chaos. When I found out what that really means, everybody says, what's order out of chaos? What does chaos mean? Well, it means, like your desk is messy. The Greek word chaos, pit, that's what it means. So Masonry, the secret doctrines, Thor, the superheroes, they're going to bring order, and it's going to come out of the pit. I want you to think about that. The guy who was originally tapped to write the screenplay for the movie Thor, and it was revised after he did what he did with it, April 2006, screenwriter and Thor fan Mark Protasevich wrote a script for the film which he described as, quote, an Old Testament God who becomes a New Testament God. Stop right here. Christ, the Bible specifically says Christ was the Lord of the Old Testament. Christ came, He is God in the flesh. He came made under the law. He was made of the law. Christ was the law that was against us. And He dies, and now He is more powerful now that He has been resurrected than He was in His old life. You see, the law was in force, but it could not make man perfect. That's what the law couldn't do. The Old Testament. Anybody follows the Old Testament, well, you got to live right and keep the Ten Commandments. Nobody does it. The Ten Commandments tell you what's wrong, but the Ten Commandments do not give you the power to stop doing what's wrong. So after Christ dies and fulfills the Old Testament, now He's resurrected. Now all power has been given unto me unto heaven and earth. That's what He said. Now He sits at the right hand of the Father, and He is with the Father, interceding. Now He's more powerful than He was when He died. Does that ring a bell to anybody? That's what the guy said. It's about a guy, an Old Testament God, who becomes a New Testament God. That's the guy that wrote it. Where did that come from? Are these guys atheists that don't believe in anything spiritual whatsoever, that just, they laugh at Egyptology and mythology? No. These are students of the arcane religions, the secret mystery doctrines. And they know exactly what they're doing. It's like, who's the lady that wrote Harry Potter? How did she come up with all that stuff? She either studied it and knew what she was talking about and was a witch, or it was inspired to her. I think it's probably a combination of the both. Let's look at the aquatic gods. And we're dealing with gods of mythology, gods of old, men of renown. We have King Neptune. Stop right here. Percy Jackson, this character in these movies now, in these children's novels, finds out that his father is Neptune. And if you remember, Percy Jackson, I have only seen the first 10 minutes of Percy Jackson. The first 2 minutes of the movie, you see this boy sitting at the bottom of the pool. He's just sitting there. And then they show him rising up out of the water. And they were talking to him, Percy, you know what? I just like being underwater. It's the beast that rises up out of the sea, a son of the gods. That's who Perseus Jackson is. He's the son of Neptune. Neptune has the trident, and the trident is basically, essentially, this symbol. It's like the 3 degrees in the Blue Lodge. It's the trident. It's the triquetra, or the triskela, or the priest giving you the 3 fingers. Okay? He's showing you what's to come. The trident is a symbol of immortality or godhood, eternal life. You have Dagon, the fish god. Actually, he's half human and half fish. In the book of Judges, they worshipped him. Then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon, their god, and to rejoice, for they said, Our God hath delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, Our God hath delivered into our hands our enemy, and the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us. How many superhero movies, books, comic books, cartoons have this same idea? We have this evil person who's trying to take over the world, and then we have our superhero, our God, who saves us. And in this case, he was Dagon, half human, half fish. We find in 1 Samuel chapter 5 that the Philistines took the ark of God, they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. And they have Ashdod. Ashdod was a land of giants. Arose early on the morrow, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. And they took Dagon and set him in his place again. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. And the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold. Only the stump of Dagon was left him. Now I want you to see this, all right? The head of Dagon was the fish part. The stump of him was the human part. The God part of him was destroyed, but it awaits resurrection. It's still in the stump, like the trunk of the tree, or hidden inside the pine tree, or the casket of Osiris, or whatever it is. It's all the same concept. That God is latent. He awaits resurrection one of these days. The idea of Dagon, I've talked about this before, the Catholic priests who wear the Dagon fish hats. Go back to this old graphic here. See the miters? That's what Catholic priests and bishops and popes wear to this day. Their religion is the religion of Dagon. Half sea creature, half human. They're Merovingian kings of the Da Vinci Code and all of these other things. The Merovingian from The Matrix. These are all modeled after King Merove, whose birth was from a human woman and a leviathan, a sea creature, a god, mating with a human woman, producing these fleur-de-lis bearing kings. The fleur-de-lis is like the trident. It's like the triquetra. It's something rising up out of the middle of the two. It's man's DNA. That's where they're getting these concepts from. That's who Dagon was. The Little Mermaid. The Mermaid King is half man, half God, half sea creature. I've always been fascinated by these two characters. And it basically started, Patrick Duffy, you remember him from Dallas? He actually had an earlier gig, and I wish it would have taken off better, but it never did. NBC came out with a movie called The Man from Atlantis. Started out as a movie. I think they made a sequel to it, and then they tried to run a TV show of The Man from Atlantis. Patrick Duffy was the man from Atlantis who had webbed fingers, and he swam like that. I learned how to do that when I was young. I could swim like that. Didn't get very far, but I could swim like that. I thought that was so cool. This guy can breathe water. He has gills. That concept was based upon these half-human, half-god characters, Dagon and Neptune. We have Prince Namor, the Submariner. Of course, he was Marvel. I didn't read much Marvel. Prince Namor he was mean. I mean, he just had a foul nature about him. But Prince Namor, the Submariner, he was a hybrid. He was half human, half god, Dagon, from Atlantis. Now, Atlantis is the land that existed before the flood that had all these secret powers, ruled over by 10 kings. Think about that. And it sunk underwater. I think Atlantis is the idea of the antediluvian pre-flood world ruled over by the giants back in the days of Noah, as it was in the days of Noah. That's what Jesus said is coming to us. So that's where the Submariner, Prince Namor, came from. Now, a character that I liked a lot better than the Submariner, because he was Marvel and he was mean, was Aquaman. And that had to do with Saturday morning, the Justice League of America, and the Wonder Twin powers, and all that stuff. But Aquaman and Wonder Woman and Batman and Robin and Superman were all part of the Justice League of America. The superheroes who were going to bring truth and justice in the America. I just love that. And Aquaman was basically the same character. His early version has, and this is, came out in two separate comic book series. His early version, his father discovers Atlantis and its secrets, teaches his son how to live underwater. But then afterwards, they retold the story. Now he's Orin, and he's born of Atlan and Atlana, the king and queen of Atlantis. And again, he is a half-human, half-god, submariner type thing, a Dagon type god, he is another god that rises up from the depths of the sea. So and let me read this to you, Revelation 13:1. I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth is as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon, that's Leviathan according to the Bible, gave him his power and his seat and great authority. You see, Aquaman, just like Prince Namor, these are God kings that rise up out of the water. Now, Revelation 13:18 sort of gives you the gel or the consistency of this half-human, half-God thing. Watch this. Revelation 13:18. Here's wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Notice that. Let's go back and look at Dagon. And I'm almost done for today. We've had enough, all right? And it's lunchtime and I'm hungry. Dagon is beast and man together, hybridized into the same body. Remember Horus, beast and man together. The picture of house, beast and man together. All of these characters with wings, or Hawkman, or the Green Man, or whatever, they are hybridizations. They are the offspring. They are half beast, half God, and half human. And so here's something that's in the Bible. It's been there forever. And I just noticed it a couple years ago, that this beast has a number. And it's the number of the beast and the number of a man. 666. Now, if we were to break it down to its simplest thing, the number 6, we go back to Genesis chapter 6, and that's what we see. Sons of God, daughters of men. And they produce these comic book characters. They produce Namor and Aquaman and Hawkman and all of these superheroes, mighty men of old, men of renown. These things that, and they're worshipped, like the green man under the green tree and things like that. And these things, God told His people, don't follow after them. Don't learn their stuff. Don't learn their ways. Now the devil, we mentioned this the last Watchman, he's going to send his false prophet to deceive mankind. Many false prophets are out there right now deceiving people, telling them stories that everybody says, well, they're just stories, they're lies, they're mythology, they're made up. You take them so seriously. Actually, they are just the figments of imaginations that are based upon the reality of what the Bible is teaching you. And the Bible is trying to give you wisdom so that you understand half human, half God, a Savior that's going to rise up with great powers. He is going to be a God King over the earth. And He's going to be so mighty and so powerful that who is like unto Him? Who is able to make war with Him? Look up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. No, it's Superman. And nobody can beat Superman. So the comic books, the graphic novels, the TV shows like Smallville and Lois and Clark and Batman and Robin and all of even the 60s version of Batman and Robin, all these ideas trying to get you to the idea. It's planting this subliminal message in your mind. What if there really was a superhero? What if there really was a man who had these magnificent powers, and he took and defeated the evil foes that were trying to conquer us? We would make him our king, our God. If you watch The Man of Steel, Clark Kent, Kal-El, Superman, finally convinces the military guys, I'm on your side. You don't have to fight me. I'm on your side. The whole world is going to wonder after the beast, who has the number of a man. They're going to worship him. And God was telling us all throughout the Scriptures, don't do it. Don't learn their ways. Don't do it. It may look like mythology now, like science fiction. But even I saw a brief interview with Leonard Nimoy, Spock, half human, half Vulcan. Remember that? Tubal-Cain, half human, half God, or half alien. Leonard Nimoy talks about. He said, you remember watching Star Trek in the '60s, and they had the tricorders, and they had this, and they had the other. He said, we have that now. And it's a general idea that your thoughts do produce fruit. Careful, little eyes what you see, little ears what you hear. But the idea that these myths, according to the Word of God, there really is a son of Satan. And he really is going to take over the world. That's what's being taught. I have a ton more information to give you. And I'm not trying to just drag this out. I've spent a lot of work and a lot of research. And I've had this in my mind to do for a long time now. And starting next week, we're going to get into this idea of the dying God. Because we mentioned Thor a while ago. He's died, he's buried, he's brought back to life, and he has greater power after that. Boy, wait till you see what I've got on this one. So we're going to talk about a lot of things coming up, and including what the end game of all of this is. Where is it headed? And we're going to talk about where these guys got their ideas. You'd be amazed. So anyway, that's coming up in the next Watchman video broadcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one. And I hope it's been educating to you. Those of you who, let's say you've never heard of me, never considered the Bible much, but you love comic books. There is a Comic Con. It's setting you up to believe a lie. Don't fall for it. There's actually, God has greater people in the Bible. Greater is He that is in me than he that is in the world. This Bible has better stories than that, I promise you. Anyway, God bless you. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.